Collected Tales of a Dublin Doctor. This podcast is a series of tales written by my father, Patrick Beaufin, and rediscovered in a file at the back of a press 30 years after his passing. The Empathy of Guides. Years ago, we had the opportunity to visit Egypt. Some cynics speak in less than complimentary terms of that ancient country, saying that it flourishes by turning over the bones of its ancestors. It is true that tourism is their greatest industry, and historic burial places the magnet for tourists and learning. We experienced as much as diminishing physical fitness would permit in 2 weeks. In great heat we left Luxor, crossed the Nile and the El Fida Canal, by the tiny village of Kurna, through the gorge known to the Arabs as the Valley of Death to the Valley of the Kings. Here the rulers of the 18th, 19th and 20th dynasties prepared rock-hewn tombs for themselves, tombs which as a rule kept the same general plan, a steep corridor, off which lead several other rooms. The giant sarcophagus containing the royal mummy was placed in the very last of these rooms. 17 royal tombs may be visited in the Valley of the Kings. Great names such as Seti, Ramesses, and Amenhotep became familiar. Giza, with its pyramids of Cephos, Seraphim, and Mycerinus, the inscrutable Sphinx and Papyrus shop. Aswan, site of the greatest dam in the world, the Elephantine Island, with its thousands of egrets, and the monastery of St. Simeon, all form such a vast canvas that one is unable to assimilate it without the expertise of the Egyptian guides. Official guides in Egypt are very strictly controlled and licensed. All are graduates of Egyptian history and at least one European language from either the University of Cairo or Alexandria. Sometimes my attention would wander from the historical hieroglyphics on the walls of a cave or tomb and settle with great admiration on the guides. This was not because they were young and attractive. Many of them were not. No, it was the accolade of one professional for another. One of the temporary, part-time jobs that I, as a student, had in the 40s was as a guide on the tour buses of Dublin. The buses were single-decker with a driver and a guide, who stood or sat at the front of the bus and through a microphone drew the attention of the tourists to the points of interest we passed. We started in O'Connell Street, noting the General Post Office, the statues from Parnell to O'Connell, a quick couplet from the deserted village as we passed Goldsmith outside Trinity College, the great windowless Bank of Ireland, and up Dame Street to the City Hall. The one difficulty I experienced was when shepherding a tour of Americans through St. Patrick's Cathedral. One of them took me aside. He was a vast man, over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and with a great paunch. He was dressed in a lightweight tan-coloured suit, with trousers supported by a narrow belt that disappeared into his fat waist. With great difficulty he extracted a flask from his hip pocket. He confided that he himself was of Jewish persuasion, but he had 2 dear friends back in Pittsburgh who were Roman Catholics. He would like to take them back some genuine Irish holy water. I explained that St. Patrick's was not a Catholic cathedral. Our next stop was Christchurch. When I had finished my spiel to the group, my Pittsburgh friend appeared again, with flask at the ready. I explained that Christchurch was Church of Ireland. The last church on our tour was St. Michan's in Church Street. Again he produced the flask. Again I shook my head. He hissed, "Hey fella, are you setting me up?" I counselled patience. We drove a few hundred yards up the street and made an unscheduled stop at the Capuchin Church. He filled his flask from the barrel in the grounds. I was head lad once more. The pay for this was poor, but if the patter had been good, gratuities could be quite rewarding. The temptation was to get more in than the route permitted. I confess that I regularly succumbed, and as we returned to base along the North Circular Road, I would have the driver stop at various houses. They would pile out of the bus, and I would give a soulful account of the house as the birthplace of some important person. I've given impassioned accounts of houses on the North Circular Road as being the birthplaces of Shaw, O'Casey, Joyce, Synge, and on one occasion, mea culpa, Daniel O'Connell. I was never caught out. I thought of all this on our last tour of Cairo. It was a visit to a number of mosques. I had read up a little about the more famous ones in advance. Our guide, a young woman, took us from one to another. The images blurred into each other. Suddenly, I noticed a discrepancy in her account. She had said we were in the Al Moyad Mosque. I, having read up on it the night before, asked her innocently, where was the famous Great Bronze Door? She became deathly pale. I winked and told her not to worry, that I too had been a guide 40 years ago, but that I had never been found out. She was so agitated that as she thanked me, she reverted to her native Arabic. I shall never forget her. Chokran Sayed, Chokran.